Welcome to another in our series of Medrash as a psychological backstory to the Bible. We've done 3 episodes about the Garden of Eden, and I'd like to now focus on some verses later after Adam and Eve have been expelled from the Garden of Eden. And I'd like to quote you a verse which may sound familiar. It says, "Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked." The Midrash, the 6,000-year-old oral tradition, asks a question of logic and challenges the conventional way of understanding this verse. It says, when the verse says that they opened their eyes and knew they were naked, does that imply that if they had not opened their eyes, they wouldn't know they were naked, even if they were blind? Of course, even a blind man knows when he's naked. So therefore, the verse must have a completely different meaning. Now, this is very radical because many people look at this verse and paint a picture that the whole story of the Garden of Eden has to do with sexuality and sins involving sexuality and how man is evil because they are mired in sexuality. But the Midrash, the oral tradition, is saying, no, that is not what it means. It's not logical. There is another meaning, a higher meaning, a deeper meaning. The Midrash therefore concludes that the word nakedness is not referring to a physical state, but rather a spiritual state. They arrived at a state of consciousness where they realized that their relationship with the divine had been damaged. They felt a sense of loneliness, existential loneliness. After all, the relationship was predicated on, at least partially, on the one precept that God gave to Adam and Eve, namely not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and bad. So now that they have violated that precept, and that was the underpinning of a core of the relationship, so they felt very alienated from God. In fact, very alienated from themselves, because there is a piece of divine in all of us. As we know from the verse earlier, when the Bible is describing how man was created, it says, God formed Adam from the dust of the earth, blowing into his nostrils the living soul. So this is the psychological backstory that we need to understand all the verses that follow. And we will also see that this feeling of being disconnected from the source not only affects their relationship, obviously, with the divine, but their relationship with themselves, because they feel disconnected from themselves. As we said, God is part of every human being. And it becomes obvious right away. The very next verse says, they heard the sound of God moving about in the garden at the breezy time of the day, and Adam and his wife hid from God among the trees of the garden. Can you imagine how disconnected they felt? They were actually trying to hide from God. They didn't even recognize God anymore. God is now taking a form of some kind of wind blowing. Doesn't that sound very distant? After all, this was the God that created them. This was the God that created Adam from the dust of the earth, and this is the God that created Eve from the rib of Adam. A very, very strong personal relationship they had. And now God seems so distant that they can only recognize him as some kind of strange sound of blowing wind in the garden. And the next verse says, and God called out to Adam and Eve and said, where are you? Now again, I've said this many times in the past, that sometimes when you read a translation, it doesn't give you a theme that you can help to get more clarity of what exactly is going on in the text, because there's a unity of themes in the Bible, and one word is used in many places, and they all inform upon each other. So the word where are you in Hebrew is ayeka. Ayeka happens to be the first word of the book of Lamentations that the prophet Jeremiah wrote after the destruction of the temple of Jerusalem. And that whole book is trying to repair the alienation that the Jewish people are feeling after the destruction of the temple. In our story as well, God isn't asking, where are you, as in, where are you located? Rather, where are you holding spiritually? And this feeling of alienation comes to a dramatic point when God actually confronts them and asks did you eat from the tree that I told you not to? So here God was giving an opening to Adam and Eve, a perfect opening to allow them to say, you know what? We're sorry, we made a mistake. What would have happened to mankind if Adam and Eve had admitted that they did something wrong? Would we still be now in this perfect state back in the Garden of Eden? But this feeling of alienation that I've been describing somehow interfered with their ability to seize this opportunity. And instead of asking for forgiveness, and Adam blamed Eve and Eve blamed the snake. And it's even worse is when Adam blames his wife, he's showing tremendous lack of gratitude. After all, this, in the beginning of the story, we see how he was so lonely, and God, showed him all the creatures that he created and said, would any of these be compatible? Of course, God knew that they would not be, so that he would very much appreciate when God fashioned Eve from his very essence, so that it would be the perfect mate. And now he's throwing it in God's face and saying, no, it's that woman, as the verse says, the woman you put at my side. So since we are here in the beginning of the creation of the world, we are setting patterns for all of the stories that follow in the Bible and all of human history. So this is the first time that man has felt disconnected from God and disconnected from themselves. This pattern will follow, and we will see it takes tragic consequences with the story of Cain and Abel. I hope you enjoyed. I look forward to your comments.